Friendly and seated vacant. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Murli Shanmugavelan, to deliver Professor M. Anandakrishnan Endowment Lecture. My relationship with Murli dates back to mid-90s. He was handling media relations for the MSSRF, and I was a print journalist. Then he moved to London to pursue his academic research. We were colleagues at Panos. He was part of Panos London's team that looked at digital inequalities, and I was the executive director for Panos South Asia. Murli Shanmugavelan researches caste in media and communication studies and digital cultures. His PhD from School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, was focused on everyday communicative practices of caste. Murli is currently working on the remanifestation of caste and social hierarchies in digital cultures such as hate speech and platform economies. His work scrutinizes everyday casteism on the internet and develops actionable policy recommendations. He's a postdoctoral researcher at the Oxford Internet Institute, and he is also a faculty fellow, Data and Society, New York. Last year, Murli delivered a talk at Oxford to make a case for academic recognition of critical caste and technology studies. While questions around the impact of race, imperialism, and colonialism have become more urgent in media, culture, and communication, and other internet studies, in response to the calls such as decolonialize the academy or Black Lives Matter, the same has not been about caste, even though caste affects a fifth of the world's population. Murli has been categorical in asserting that caste cannot ensure social justice, equality, fellowships, fraternity, and fairness. He also says caste is not a community, it is an artificial category designed to actually create hierarchies. Professor M. Anantakrishnan's endowment lecture aims to provide impetus to critical inquiry to expand the scope and the reach of higher education. RMRL was fortunate to have Professor Anandakrishnan as one of its trustees. The endowment was created from the personal corpus of Professor Anandakrishnan. When he passed away in 2021, Chief Minister Stalin, in his condolences, said, "It was Anantakrishnan's report to the government that opened the doors of higher education to students from rural areas. Underprivileged and middle-class students from rural areas who are now engineers and doctors will understand this very well. Besides, he was also responsible for bringing in a revolution in information and technology sector in the state as an advisor to the government. Hence, it is appropriate to have this talk on technological inclusiveness today." Over to you, Murli.
Anandakrishnan Vanakkam. This talk will be in English for all sorts of reasons, but I'm happy to keep the discussion in bilingual, both Tamil and English, so if that's helpful. Thanks, Paneer, for a very generous introduction. It gives me immense pleasure to be here, especially in the name of Anandakrishnan Krishnan's endowment lecture, because perhaps it's fitting to say that I'm one of the Tamils who benefited from its policy, legacy, and intervention. So, I didn't want to say anything more than that because, the reason why I'm here, probably I benefited from one of his interventions, such as his work in education, digital education and electronic governance, introducing single window system, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, let me set out what I'm going to talk about, because so there's no surprise to begin with. So what I'd like to talk about is that I'd like to share my journey, how I actually ended up talking about caste and technology in the first place. So when I and then I would like to go on to explain or make the case that why caste should be theorized or reconceptualized from communication studies and communication technology studies perspective, which unfortunately have not yet happened. Or I can say that I've started doing it and a few others have started doing it, but it's not been recognized as a very established discipline so far, and I'd like to make the case for it. And then I will move on to if caste can be viewed as communicative practices, or rather should be looked at from communication studies perspective. What does that mean to caste and technology, and how do we actually understand casteism in technology, or how casteism and technology kind of talk to each other so that the caste hierarchies remanifest on its own. There's often an interplay between caste network and digital network being the phenomena in this both parties. So let me start with the journey. I mean, normally, if I were to talk about caste and technology in outside India, I would define what caste is for uninitiated participants or listeners. But here, I'm not going to do that. However, what I'd like to say, how I see caste from definitional point of view, especially when looking from communication studies point of view. I mean, there are lots of learned scholars here, policymakers are here, and we all come from very different trajectories. You have a political economy approach to define caste. You have political science and sociological approach, anthropological approach, and economical approach. There are different ways of actually intersecting caste. Caste being the big elephant in the room, you can actually dissect in any ways you like. Here's my 2 cents to it. I would like to see caste from communication studies point of view. And why should I do that? And the reason is, conceptually speaking, caste has always been, when you look at from a particular discipline, caste is always actually essential. Caste is always essentialized. So if you look at from political economy perspective, caste is often looked at, what does this mean in terms of, from that particular disciplinary point of view. What I argue is that if you look at from communication studies perspective, it disarms the disciplinary approach. It then immediately puts you on an everyday practices approach, which is much better suited to understanding today's everyday life, which is a mixture of politics, sociology, political economy, and whatnot, you name it. Everything is actually mixture in everyday practices. And communicative practices actually alerts us to the specificity of the context in which caste is played out. And that's very important. I'll give you an example. There is this very common, I'm sure that many of us, to this crowd, it may not be very revealing, but for the sake of sharing an example, people argue that untouchability is fading. Therefore, caste is sort of experiencing this erosion. That's one argument. But if you look at from communication studies perspective, we know that untouchability may be lessened in certain urban contexts, but it also actually heightens certain kind of interactions such as food habits and other places and rituals and symbolism. So here, when I say communicative practices, I do not necessarily mean just communication per se. It includes spatial communication, it includes silence, which is largely ignored in Western trajectory of communication studies. Western trajectory of communication studies does not recognize silence as a form of communication. Whereas if you look at from caste perspective, silence is a very, very powerful mode of communication. And what I'm trying to say here is that when you look at from caste from communication studies point of view, it also problematizes several established Western communication concepts and theories. And that's very important. Another example is privacy. The privacy as it is talked about today, extremely in technological terms, mostly in meta terms. But if you view from anti-caste perspective, it problematizes the concept of privacy in technological disciplinary by speaking. So it's very important. I'm arguing that caste should be looked from communication studies point of view, which is much better suited to understand existing situation and its subtle manifestation. And it also alerts us to understand, make the case that benign expression is often the vehicle for abhorrent violence in terms of casteism. So we often actually pay attention to abhorrent casteism as an exception, but very often everyday casteism is actually where what I call caste actually is dormant. So, it's just waiting for the right moment to happen. That's all it needs to do. So we talk, there's a caste element often, it's a dormant. When the time and space occurs, the caste immediately becomes active. And that's when the everyday communicative practices is more important. From my own field research, there's when an oppressed caste person is having a conversation with a dominant caste person, and they are talking about television program, and this oppressed caste person is talking about a particular program, and the dominant caste person immediately quips saying that, oh, you've got a free television these days, haven't you? And that's where caste becomes active. And it says that he's pointing at his economic level, he's pointing at where he's coming from. So there are different contexts. I'll tell you more example as we go along, but that's just the kind of reason by making the case why caste should be looked at from communication studies point of view. A non-essentialist approach helps you understand, especially in today's time, because non-essentialist approach does recognize the Hinduism, Sanatani principle, are largely responsible and vehicles for caste system, but it also recognizes how caste exists beyond Hinduism, how caste exists in everyday practices, subtle, fashion, taste, rituals, all that actually encompasses when you talk about non-essentialist communication studies point of view. So the other thing is that the reason why I talk about this communication studies and caste is because castelessness is becoming a sort of a topic, especially amongst diaspora, especially in if you look at the caste discourse in North America, in the UK, and good parts of Europe, people now often talk about, there's no caste here. Maybe it exists in India, maybe it exists somewhere else, but it doesn't exist here. The castelessness is becoming very, very pervasive, that discourse. I think the castelessness exists because if you're in a room, if you're with 50 people, if all 50 people belong to the same caste group, then the group is actually casteless. That's what often happens. And then when someone else walks in, then the situation erupts. And that's what happened after 1970s when lower caste, so-called other oppressed caste groups actually started moving in the US or in the UK, let's say in the 60s and 70s, the diaspora actually started getting diluted. It became kaleidoscopic, and it ceased to be monolithic. And that's when this whole problem actually started erupting. So castelessness need to be problematized. And again, I argue that can only happen from communication studies point of view, but also those who benefit from the iniquities of globalized caste system, they often argue that modern world, through its embrace of social networks, capital, technology, has effectively become casteless. They proudly observe how the disruptions of digital networks are putting the question of caste oppression to rest, a relic of older times, which is a kind of a absolutely nonsensical statement, but that's what's happening. And critical caste and technology studies discards the veneer of a castelessness in modern India and among South Indian diaspora, an ideological myth that enables Brahmanism, coloniality, tech-driven global capitalism in much the same way post-racial rhetoric props up racism and racial capitalism. And that's the reason why we should pay attention from this point of view. And for those of you, some of you may know about this. In the UK, there's been a systemic campaign, which I'm part of. I'm proud to be part of. We have to criminalize caste-related practices in the UK, and we often fail because they say there is no caste existing, there's no caste in the UK. That's their argument, they often say. And caste is often culturalized. That's another biggest problem. We'll come to that in a minute. So caste is often culturalized, but also it is becoming more and more culturalized, especially in today's globalized world. And the reason I'm saying this is there are certain emerging global perspective that's coming when we talk about casteism, and that's quite unhelpful to advance debate on caste and technology at the moment. Historically, it's a very interesting thing to notice that when Marx wrote about India, he did definitely believe, and he took, to paraphrase his quote text, he said, as communication technology became, road infrastructure becomes more and more available, he predicted the erosion of caste. But we know that that's not the case. And in the contemporary world, castelessness goes hand in hand with caste pride, caste positivism, and they actually often produce caste-related harm. And these are very closely related to globalization and technology world. I'll give you 3 examples to support that very quickly. The first one is probably the most startling one. So when Amartya Sen delivered a lecture in 2007 in Delhi to NASCOM, I think, to the Association of Indian IT and Business Processing Outsourcing Industries, where Sen explained India's IT success through its historical respect for distinctive skills and seeing that as a social contribution. To quote the context, he did say in that speech, it's still available online, caste has so many notorious aspects, but there is one good thing that came out of caste system. It's the kind of historical respect for distinctive skills. So that skill actually, apparently, according to Sen, have been manipulated and harvested for best reasons in the technology and globalized world. The second example is the Prospect magazine from the UK, which is widely considered to be centrist left. It attributed India's IT success to the pedagogic and intellectual tradition rooted in Sanskritic Vedas. And they kept on repeating this BS several times in the international policy circuit. This, in turn, is getting reproduced as a caste positivism. So what is actually positive out of caste? Look here. These are the results. And this caste positivism actually again transported into caste culture and pride. And this caste culture and pride, I mean, you have an academic contribution there as well. Chris Fuller's Tamil Brahmins, repackaged how Tamil Brahmins actually became a middle class. So he kind of classed the caste. So he kind of actually, in a sense, he sort of conceptualized that the Brahmin caste, as it was several decades ago, is disappearing and is morphed into a globalized middle class, which is a very, very problematic argument, but we can discuss that more later. So all these are actually linked to globalization and tech capitalism. That's very important. So that's how the caste and technology sort of play out to produce casteism in many ways. The other thing is, how is multiculturalism being exploited on the back of tech platforms to promote casteism? So you have, again, an example. It's best to go with an example. If you look at Facebook, or I don't know, but I don't think Twitter, but definitely Facebook, you have closed groups, and you also have in places like the UK and the US, you have associations, both virtual and physically meeting associations, blatantly calling themselves to be cultural association with a title called Brahmin Association or Iyer Association or Iyengar Association. So I can give you an example in London, where I come from at the moment. North London Brahmin Society is an established charity, and it is regulated by Charity Commission. And this particular association makes it very clear that not everyone can become a member, and they have certain rules. rules. In Facebook, it's very interesting. You have a Tambram associations, and I tried to become a member, and I was asked very interesting, specific questions that would reveal who I am, what I was up to, and I failed the test miserably. So I couldn't become a member. I couldn't walk into the space as a client or a patron, whatever. So my point here is that the social media platforms are so caste ignorant, and that's the word we should use, not caste agnostic, caste ignorant, and therefore there is a whole narrative of multiculturalism, caste as multiculturalism is actually being promoted. That goes hand in hand with Sanatani principles. So if you look at the examples of how, when Modi arrives in London, how they spin the whole event, it's considered to be Indian culture. And vegetarianism is another example. I'm currently doing a research, I'm currently working on a piece of research, which is looking at how internet labels vegetarianism into caste as Hindu culture or Indian culture, as opposed to vegetarianism as a caste practice. It doesn't do that. So those kind of a labeling and filtering is another problem. So there is a lot of casteism that's being packed as part of multiculturalism and be redistributed and manifested and disseminated on social media platform. Yeah, I'll take another 10 to 12 minutes. Is that okay? 15 minutes, yeah. Okay, so that actually takes me to the core of the topic today, caste and technology. So where are we with it, and what is happening, landscape analysis, and what is that we need to do, and where do we go from here? So those are the things that I'd like to address very quickly in 15 minutes. And the way I've conceptualized caste and technology operates on, especially digital technology, it operates on three levels. One is front end, second one is a midpoint, third one is the structural and architectural base. So if you look at any digital space, you have everyday conversation, which is the front end. So the front end is the one somehow we talked about it. I mean, here I have to acknowledge something. The front end also has, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I want to acknowledge that the front end has also contributed to a lot of anti-caste emancipatory politics. So there is no doubt about it. So please do not come in the discussion tell me, am I a skeptic? No, I'm a skeptic in a sense that I'm just addressing what's not been addressed as part of the research agenda. That's what I'm trying to do. That does not mean that caste, internet, that does not mean that there is no positive aspect or something like. Yes, it is. I acknowledge that. In fact, when I interviewed lots of anti-caste activists, both here and outside, they all agreed, especially if you look at lynching and other things, the way that it got blown out, it hit the international media. That's purely because of the online dissemination. So there's no doubt. It has a very good set of positive effects, and we can talk about it later. But what I'm focusing here is that what's actually not been adequately addressed as part of the research agenda. So I want to move away from the euphoric, the digital utopia, and try to problematize what's that we need to look at it. So that's a sort of a front end conversation, and we also there have been research coming out recently. People are talking about, even in Twitter, how you quote and retweet, and what's the caste network behind when you quote tweet or retweet. So there's a kind of a caste element to it. And also here I'd just like to take a moment, which is kind of actually slightly linked to the structural and architectural fine-tuning, but it also can be discussed here. And the second thing is that many social media platforms have they are not very cost sensitive. I'll give you an example. If you look at the word pariah, for example, pre-digital times, I mean, Hannah Arendt has used the Jew as a pariah. It's been used in an academic sense. Problematic as it may sound, these references were happening in certain silos. Now, it's very interesting what's happening right now in social media world. So because the word pariah has actually become, now that Oxford has put that word as an entry into an English word. So as Cambridge and other major in dictionaries. Now, all social media platforms recognize this particular word as a legitimate sanitized expression. So previously, if any two persons, caste affected, coming from caste affected societies, use these slurs, we would know that this is an offense. But now you cannot go to Twitter or Facebook and complain this, because from the labeling and filtering, what they call the process of filtering and labeling, pariah is no longer a caste slur in digital culture. So the word is actually completely removed from that. So it's very, on one hand, the internet is actually caste insensitive. On the other hand, it actively sort of, builds on casteism and normalizes casteism. That's another thing. So that's about everyday conversation. The second one is organized, that links to organizational and institutional intervention, and that's a midpoint. So what needs to happen if those slurs are often used? Here is an example again. If two Afro-Americans exchange the N word in social media platform, the AI machine is so fine-tuned, it doesn't flag up. But if it's used between one Afro-American and white person, and the machine is so sensitive, it's been trained in that way, now it can raise a flag. So I'm just giving an example how critical race theory is so aware, and it's kind of actually, active in mitigating racism, whereas critical caste studies and critical caste theory is lagging behind, and we need to set the agenda, and these are the places where we can set the agenda. So this requires for context moderation, not content moderation. Now, this calls for two sets of intervention. Content moderation is a very generic moderation. If you see something very obscene, then you flag it up. But contextual moderation requires a lot of nuances. Now, what happens in social media platform? Well, without naming and shaming, I know that one major social media platform has only 6 or 7 people in India as full-time staff members, and there's no content moderator in India at all. And for Facebook, you have some content moderators, but we are now currently beginning to look at who are these content moderators. I mean, which are the entrepreneurs? What are the caste profiles of these entrepreneurs? Because that kind of determine what they consider casteist slur or not. Because casteist slur is inextricably linked to your one's caste positionality. So what I may consider caste slur, someone else may find it's okay. It's just a normal word. So that's because of one's caste positionality. So now we're trying to actually advocate not only they should increase more context moderators when content moderating, but also they should ensure those context moderators come from oppressed caste backgrounds, and the training should be given so that there will be more and more fine-tuning of this machine learning process and AI process. And that's not happening at all at the moment. And then roadmaps and the guidelines and regulatory principles, caste-sensitive regulatory principles is missing. Most social media platforms recognize, are willing to give you a blue tick only if you reveal your authentic self. But many anti-caste activists, especially women and transgender people, find it extremely difficult to reveal their authentic self. And they have repeatedly requested to social media platform that they should be more sensitive when actually talking about granting blue ticks or whatever to people belonging to caste-affected societies or any other marginalized and protected categories. And these social media platforms come from a very, very generic Western principle. One may recall from the Huffington Post, Haryana Huffington once said, no one is allowed to post an opinion on, she's the one who led this the campaign. No one is allowed to write any opinion unless he or she or they are willing to reveal their true identity in the comments column. But now that's changed a bit, but that's the sort of these are the sort of principles that actually may not be helpful when it comes to implementing in cost-effective societies. So we need to actually have, these social media platforms and the network sites should be much more cost sensitive when they roll out these principles. The last one is a bit longer. It's actually the machine learning process, structural and machine learning intervention. This I think is really most fascinating to me, at least. I'll give you an example of from Shadi.com. When Shadi.com introduced the option to go matrimonial, users had the opportunity to add cost label or cost filtering, so to speak. And then someone from the UK, a lady, I think, she brought it up and became a very sensational media story. And Shadi, first denied, then retracted. In the whole process, Shadi made a very interesting argument. That's what I'd like to draw your attention to. Shadi made an argument that this is not, okay, by the way, Shadi is registered in the Valley. So that's another problem. So India does not have the jurisdiction, even if some of us actually want to question that behavior. That's another problem. Anyway, but the most important point is Shadi.com made a very compelling argument, and that's an industry argument. The argument was, in the Valley, whenever we do machine learning, we adopt and implement John Rawls' theory of justice. So when you write codes, there are certain principles that you have to adhere to, ethical and legal principles. And the legal principles largely derived from John Rawls' theory of justice. And what's John Rawls' theory of justice? If you know already, sorry, please shut your ear for next 60 seconds. So Rawls' theory of justice is actually rooted in distributive justice, that everyone has access to equal things and equal opportunity and equal scenarios, so to speak. No one is denied of that. So Shadi.com argued, therefore, we gave opportunities to every user to provide any details, whatever they wanted to insert. So you do not have the Shadi.com cost filter. There is no drop-down menu to click one, but there is a label that you can fill in, and the label say community, culture, something of that sort. And people did immediately understood what is this actually column meant for, and they started filling their caste identity in that particular column. So the Shadi.com absorbed from many responsibilities and said, this is the standard legal principles in the Valley, so we are not fine, we now take it out, but we are not under any obligation to remove this, and nor can we be blamed. That's the line of argument. But the media pressure, it grew, intense pressure. In Times UK wrote a series of articles, and then Shadi.com had to withdraw. The point here is that if the Valley was cost sensitive, if the Valley's people or who represent us there, from here, there, if they were cost sensitive, then they would have implemented, they would have put not the distributive justice, but they would have put affirmative social justice as a legal principle. Now that's missing. So there are certain machine learning principles, legal and ethical principles, that we need to actually, draw attention so that social media companies can actually listen to and fine-tune cost-sensitive architecture from the back itself. At the moment, we are doing the front end. Oh, this is a hate speech. Can you please punish this person? But what we need to do is that we need to actually build a machine. So when you Google, or search use any image in my machine and use a cost-related slur, what kind of results it's bringing up? So I searched, I had two machines, one sitting in Nagpur, the other sitting in London, and both machines were completely wiped out with no previous history whatsoever. And we fed in a lot of data on two machines. One was fed with lots of left-oriented contents. So we kind of did it purposefully for a month. we chucked in, we searched for Che Guevara, blah, 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 all that sort of thing. The other one was actually, stuffed with lots of, centrist / right-wing centrist content. And then after that, we searched for, in both places, Nagpur being a sensitive area, and then one in London, and actually in Bradford, we searched for Ambedkar. And very interestingly, both results were appallingly same. And then there were lots of, the machine kind of picked up certain nuances, but mostly they were, especially the right-wing machine gave lots and lots of derogatory and right-wing hate material. But more so, when you search words like Brahmin, when you search words like Shudra, when you search words like Dalit, and those images, if you look at it, it's very interesting. The Getty images are often actually being, they come up. And you can see that Getty images, they have their very strong traditional caste stance. So when they talk about Brahmins, it's all about technology, time cover, news cover, that sort of thing. So how do we actually desensitize this? So we have proposed now to run some sort of a hackathon to kind of, crowdsource people to add filters, what sort of slurs should be in there, what constitutes, let's say, Tamil slurs, or what constitutes slurs in other languages, or what kind of images that we should actually label. And this takes me to the next point, digital archive. And we often actually don't pay attention to digital archive, especially in online magazines and so on and so forth. Every time when there is an online news, any news about anti-caste, emancipatory politics related news content, like say about Periyar or Ambedkar or anybody else, or even about contemporary leaders who talk about caste and so on, it's always archived, notoriously archived as in a very simplistic term. So you may have a very progressive online magazine, obviously owned by a dominant caste owner, media owner, but also dominant caste progressive reporter, maybe writing some amazing copy edit, but the way it's actually filed in the digital world is often simplistically Dalit story, violent story, simple as that. And the tags are not properly adequately. So we have a complete repository of anti-caste digital content that have not been adequately acknowledged and tagged and archived and stored. And as a result, we are going to be, we are going to be at loss. So this needs to be, so there's a whole lot of technical transfer and skill building work that needs to happen. And I just want to end with one last thing. This is an emerging area, and we need to set some kind of a research agenda. And that's the most, that's what I'm trying to make a point. So places like this, when I speak, I'd like to actually appeal that how do we actually work further? I've got a set of recommendations, but that's not for now. But most importantly, we need to look at how caste is being remanifested in digital cultures. And the last and the most recent example, one being, with that I'll end this talk, is caste and platform work. So there's this, there is this website called bookmymaid.com from Bangalore. And this particular website, domestic care workers can sort of, they can join themselves, and then the company mediates, and then they find the respective clients and so on and so forth. So I joined the website as a client, and I looked at the dashboard. It was absolutely appalling to look at the house owners who hire these domestic care workers and their conversation amongst themselves. They say, do not invite this domestic care worker because this person always demands to use our toilet. And therefore, I gave 0 rating to this person. And then they say, that person deserves. So this sort of a caste is comrade conversation, and completely unmediated for most part. And there are examples, and there are also examples in Haryana recently during the COVID time. when hairstylists were reintroduced as a platform worker and the hairstylists went to their clients, they were reconstructed or deconstructed as barbers, traditional barbers, and they were given the traditional barber respect. So don't come to the front door. So you can see that how platform is not just disruptive, it can be, it's not only, it's least disruptive, but also it can be more regressive. So this is the reason why we should keep an eye on this, when we talk about technology, communication studies from anti-caste perspective. And that brings to that very top level, quick summary of what I've been doing. Any questions, please? Thank you very much.
The floor is open. People can ask questions. Before that, I have one small question. Rolls was late 70s and digital technology is post 90s phenomenon. Why should they look at a theory which was of the late 70s and not anything which came out later?
I think it's a good question. I'm not sure if I can do justice to this question, but from what I've read, I think the US, when it comes to theory of justice, Rawls seems to be the tall figure, and he's been quoted again and again in constitutional law, in judgments, and so on and so forth. And they think Rawls is the most progressive thinker when it comes to jurisprudence, and that's what holds water. But why the Valley specifically chose Rawls' theory of justice, something I have to find out.
Floor is open. Yes.
So the example of Shadi.com that you gave, so we also have similar things, right? Like Tamilmatrimony.com. So it has this pull down menu where you choose. So just a follow up to that is that obviously that is against the principles of the Constitution. You try to remove, I mean, Constitution says, to my knowledge, you will remove caste or you work against caste or whatever. But I'm not sure. But can you file a case against Tamil matrimony, for example?
Can I what?
File a case against Tamilmatrimony.com.
This is $1 million question. So actually, some of us here know. I've been trying to find out. I know it's anti-constitution to practice caste, but you cannot invoke constitution to do everything at all the time. So you need to have something similar to Equality Act that's been passed in some other countries. So I am not sure we have that act. Anybody else here who is very well versed, please come up. So I think it's if you look at the leading English newspapers in this country, which is considered themselves to be progressive, have been publishing matrimonial, cost-oriented matrimonial, cost-oriented rentals. But no one actually. I mean, I think they have a legally sounding ground. That's my thinking. And in fact, I'm going to have a conversation tomorrow with the senior advocate here in Chennai to discuss. I've been looking for it, everyone accepts it's anti-constitutional, but can you sue by citing an act? No one is able to give me a concrete answer. That's the thing.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. We come from science and technology studies and history of technology. So recently we come across this particular disciplinary orientation called anthropology of ignorance. That might be one of the disciplines through which we could look at these kind of things, where everybody knows what others knows as well, but we tend to act like we don't know about this. And then there is your quote on skill by Amartya Sen. Historically, if you look at the skill as a component, actually the caste groups or the communities who has sound knowledge on skill is actually the people who work a lot, who work with material a lot. So we could actually bring a history of technology or science perspective into it to argue against these things. Like it is not a new thing. Like skills has been one of the foreground which actually cut across caste. But actually the people who have been working with the materials and on hands is always ahead with people who had only read text in that matter.
I take your point. Thanks for your comments. So I just have 2 points to just share back with you. One is Sen's point is particularly linked to the rote memory of Vedic texts. So how one can actually reproduce those texts flawlessly, and which is akin to flawless coding. That's what he was particularly talking about, number one. Second is that I agree with you, like, upper caste members are much more science and tech oriented, if you look at it. But also after independence, one can look at how science and technology has been consciously groomed. I mean, we have this famous saying, temples, dams are in India's modern temples. That's a very symbolic and amazing statement that captures the sentiment of how the science and technology is being re-articulated after independence in a very religious and cultural context. Thank you. Please.
Can I ask a question? It's a very thought-provoking speech. The Indian Constitution promotes the caste system. The Constitution has abolished only the untouchability, Article 17. When the Constitution promotes or protects the caste system, how are you going to put forth a legal framework to prevent such things in the social media or in the digital? For example, we have a matrimonial. You said the shadi.com. There are many sites, Adi Dravida matrimony, 1 year matrimony. So that is being promoted in the advertisement also. Therefore, nothing unconstitutional when we advertise in the name of caste. That is the reason why Tandai Periyar in 1957 burned the constitution which promotes the protection of caste in the country.
I'm not a constitutional expert, so I'm just not going to comment on that. But I just want to react to one point that's been mentioned a few times now. Not just Tamil matrimonial site, and you mentioned about Adi Dravida site and Nadar site, so on and so forth. This goes back to my last point that I'm talking about. These are not human-generated websites. I just want you to know that these microsites are machine-learned process. I think that can be easily tackled and can be stopped. But again, that calls for some sort of an agreement and a negotiation understanding with the tech providers. So you can see that one site now, one matrimonial site now can propagate 100 micro matrimonial sites now. That's how it's been designed. So yeah.
So this is Lourdes from Yelagiri Hills. My question is that regarding caste and technology, you are saying that social media platforms have very less content moderators. For example, any caste issues happen in Tamil Nadu, people in social media started commenting using that caste. Like they use that suppressed caste name. For example, if I'm not wrong, if some 1 year versus scheduled caste issues happening, the upper class people use that lower caste people's caste and they start commenting. I just want to represent, like, why don't you represent your research or the thing to Facebook India or Twitter India personals or their office, so that they can make some corrections, right?
I mean, this is not a geography bound issue. I think we need to engage. Some of us have been engaging with Facebook and Twitter. The problem is that they are not particularly cost sensitive. So one of the things that we are trying to achieve is, that's why I said we are planning to run hackathon to crowdsource, to get many people like some of us to online remotely, log in. These are the sort of a Tamil costless that we know of. So if 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 people do a hackathon for 2 days, we will collect a pool of an extensive costler vocabulary, and we would like to actually put that out online
in a sort of a format so that that can be used by the social media platform.
Sir.
Technically speaking, they should be doing this job, but they are not doing it. So these are some of the research agenda that I actually was referring to. Thank
Other
you.
thing, sir, I was a journalist. I did my journalism graduation from NDTV Media Institute, Delhi. The thing is that one of my friends is working with Facebook India. He is a bureaucrat's son. Lot of bureaucrats, son and daughters being pushed into Twitter and Facebook and all. They know the policy, like what and all it can be done. So it will be more useful if you can that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I understand, but I think the reason why these platforms are not paying adequate attention is probably because of these representatives, bureaucrats representatives who are extremely cost insensitive. So it's a chicken or egg problem. Thank you.
Thanks. I found the disaggregation of the front end, organizational, institutional, and machine learning very helpful in understanding kind of the different levels at which this research program has to happen. I mean, a specific question about the Cisco case in California and whether that has made any impact on the organizational, institutional level of kind of consciousness among tech companies about the fact of caste as a problem that they have to.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to touch. I couldn't touch it because of time. I think it's yes and no to answer your question very briefly. But the longer answer is that I was talking about how the costlessness was articulated, and Cisco is the perfect example where, for a good period of time, everyone believed in costlessness. But when someone from outside came in, and that situation got disrupted, and this is why caste became from being dormant to active, right? But the interesting thing about Cisco, the 2 points. One is the outing is a very interesting phenomenon because as I began my talk, that caste should be looked at from a communication studies point of view. In this particular context, the person did not tell the line manager did not accuse or say anything like in a slur way, in a traditional slur way. He simply outed a fact. And outing a fact, the articulating itself disrupted the entire situation, right? But that's something that we should pay. This is what's happening increasingly. And people talk about affirmative action, merit, and so on and so forth in public spaces, and then associate caste positivism, pride as part of multicultural package of Hindu culture, right? But from legal point of view, what has happened so far? The case was booked. John Doe, John Doe was gave a statement, and then California state actually withdrew its position, and now they are trying to sort of reconsider its position, and nothing is yet formalized as we speak. But this particular issue did definitely create some heated debate. That's for sure.
The problem and the presentation that you made is a manifestation of what is happening in the wider society. And we have very feeble and very meek kind of anti-caste movement right now. When that is the case, I feel that now you are trying to address the issue of manifestation rather than the cause of it. No?
Rather than? Oh, okay. I think that's a good question. I think there is a very clear understanding that we cannot talk entirely about caste per se. How do I annihilate caste? I mean, that's interesting. We are actually, we are all for anti-caste solidarity, and it's an ongoing process. But in the ongoing process, what's happening at the moment in digital spaces, for example, when I talk about how do we build a cost-sensitive architecture, which is not just actually filtering the manifestation, but also fine-tuning the thinking of code writer, machine learning scientist as well. So I think it's not either or. Maybe I should rephrase that manifestation more. I should define it more clearly. But it's also part of actually tackling some of the cost on certain level. But do I claim to be that I can annihilate cost by talking about cost and technology? No, I'm part of the game. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's very fascinating presentation. Like, I mean, again, I actually I like your appeal for a kind of new sort of intervention to tackle all those things. Okay, it's a comment like that. I mean, it's clear the caste aspect in your presentation, in your paper, it is so clear that, especially from the point of communication. Then the term technology is a little bit more problematic because in the Indian languages, when you per se take the aspect of technology, for instance, take IIT, Indian Institute of Technology, obviously it goes to the computer, then the managerial kind of knowledge production. Okay, so when we look at the technology as a kind of problematic term, then I think you need to have a kind of little more expansion or kind of more articulation on that thing. The caste part is more clear, but it's simply limiting to the the information technology, but the technology has a kind of complicated sense of meaning. It has to be discussed in a wider manner.
I agree, but I think my focus is specifically on digital cultures. So which something that I think I made it clear, but if not, that's what it is. But I completely agree. For those of you who are interested in it, I have developed a module. It's called Critical Caste and Technology Studies.net. So you can have a look at it. One of the things we are trying to do at the moment is that we're trying to introduce the larger paradigm, technological politics and inequalities in the larger technology domain as well. So, looking at pre-independence and post-independence and where it is right now and how that speaks to digital cultures as well. So that bit that needs to be actually brought in. At the moment, we are focusing just on digital cultures, but I take your point. Thank you.
Thank you, Murli. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.